In this episode, I'm going to talk about how to train for bouldering, probably my favourite of all the climbing disciplines. I thought it would be good to make a general guide to training for bouldering to help you focus on the correct priorities and avoid some common mistakes that I see climbers make. I guess I'm going to pitch this video to climbers who've been climbing for between 6 months and a few years, but I also think it might be a good idea for even very experienced boulderers to watch this, because for the very experienced, some of the challenges can be actually unlearning some of the bad habits that you've got into over the years, and they can be extremely difficult to shift, but even more so, they can be extremely difficult to see. So a discussion of, a revisiting of the general subject of how to train for bouldering can be a good idea, no matter what stage of climbing you're at. I'm going to split this video into 6 different parts, and the first part is setting your goals and understanding your resources. Those can be resources of facilities, a bouldering wall, and resources of time, and resources of energy, things like that. But also it's really critical to settle on what your goals are. Your goals can shift and change, and you can have many different levels of goals all working at the same time. Goals for today, goals for the next week, and goals for the next decade. Do you want to do those boulders outdoors? Indoors? Do you want to do them in a competition setting? The training activities that you might do on a boulder wall might differ quite a lot depending on those different goals. I suppose it's fair to say that the most common goals in climbing involve a grade, your first V10, your first Font 8C, whatever. And that's fine. I think grades are a really good goal to have, but they may not be the only goal, and they may only be part of what you're actually looking for in your climbing. There are also other layers of goals which, on one hand, you might think of them as tangential goals, that is, that they're less important, or maybe they're actually more important. For example, why are you ultimately doing bouldering? What is it that you want to get out of it? Some people might do it because they want to be healthier or stronger or something like that. I think, though, most people really want to do bouldering because it's fun. So it's important that you think of the full range of things that you want to get out of climbing, not just the grade you want to climb, so that you avoid the situation where you achieve the goal you think you wanted to have and then realise that wasn't actually the goal that you wanted to achieve. A lot of climbers write down their goals, and this can really help you to see them clearly and make sure you're accountable and make sure that your decisions you make are actually moving you towards your goals or away from them. I don't personally do that myself, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about them. I do hold them in my head and I do think about them every day. And I think about all those different layers of goals, both the kind of underlying foundational goals. Things like, I want to push my limits, I want to enjoy myself, I want to explore beautiful places and beautiful new areas to boulder in. But I also think about those more practical goals, like I want to climb this project or that project, and some sub-goals that flow from those, like I need to improve my pinch strength for a certain hold, or I need to improve my body tension, or some more short-term goal. So the basic point is that the language you use to define your goals really matters. If all you write down on your list of goals is I want to climb V10, then that will direct your decisions in a certain way, which may either be good or may not be quite right. So keep in mind all the different levels of what you actually want to get out of your bouldering. The other fundamental to training for bouldering is the resources you have to train. Now that might be your facility to train, your local climbing wall, your local boulders, or your ability to travel and actually go bouldering. But there's also another aspect to your resources. To me, the most important resource you have is your readiness to train, how ready your body is to absorb training. Part 2 is training your technique. Climbing is first and foremost a technical sport, and technique is really a lever for your strength. Bouldering is often thought of as a strength sport, and it does require strength, it does require explosivity, but you can only really apply strength if you have the technique to do it. Learning technique in bouldering is about problem solving. I guess that's why they call it a boulder problem. And if you think about problem solving at a fundamental level, to me that's about curiosity. So learning technique is just like playing with moves and being curious how moves work, how they put together, and how not just you but other people can do moves. When I first started to think about technique learning in climbing myself, I thought about one really simple observation that I made just going to the climbing wall and watching climbers. If you look at 2 different climbers who both go to the wall 3 times a week in an evening and do for roughly the same amount of time and do roughly the same amount of routes, One climber, and I'm taking strength out of the equation here, one climber progresses and learns to climb really well and has excellent technique, and the other climber 10 years later is pretty much the same as where they started. They've not really progressed meaningfully in their grade at all. So why is this? How can this happen? And when I looked at climbers who I'd seen at my own local climbing wall for years and I could see were not progressing, I tried to look at the way they were climbing, the way they were acting in their sessions. And to me, it struck me that they were very passive in the way they approached their climbing sessions. You know, perhaps they'd come from their work, perhaps they were a little bit tired, perhaps they still had other things on their mind, or perhaps they just weren't fully engaging with the climbing in a way that they could do if they just adopted that habit. But whatever the reason for it was, I could see that they were just climbing up a route, coming down, and if they'd fallen off it, those are the types of climber who you would say, what happened, what made you fall off, and which hand did you have on that hold when you fell off? And they would say, I have no idea, I can't remember. And to me, that's not really paying attention, not really noticing how moves work together. Conversely, if you look at boulderers who are really expert and can climb at a really high level, it's definitely not just because they're strong, but if you listen to them having a session together, you will see that they are constantly discussing the nuance of movement, constantly experimenting. So the whole process of learning technique is systematic experimenting with moves. Why don't we try the heel here? Why don't we move the foot first and then put the heel on? Try these different orders of moves, or a little bit more aggressive on this move, or a little bit less aggressive, or take the hold open-handed first and then crimp, or it could be any number of details. But boulderers who are climbing together are often feeding back to each other, saying, oh, that attempt looked a bit better, and maybe that was because you did it this way. And it's not just like left hand, right hand, different sequence. It's more nuanced than that, more of the real details of the movement, the precision with the foot, exactly where the foot goes in the foothold, all these little things. So fundamentally for me, technique learning on the wall is play, but it's serious play, systematic play. And it requires a lot of engagement and concentration and experimentation. Sometimes technical learning in sport or any skill-based activity has been thought of as the pure number of hours or the number of moves that you need to clock up in order to learn how to do it. And that idea has actually been largely falsified. And it seems clear that some people can learn to be an expert at something far quicker than you might expect, and others never get there. And to me, this is because it misses the other part of the equation. Technique learning is about the number of moves multiplied by the quality of thought and feedback that goes into them. I do feel that this aspect of experimentation, of engagement, trying to understand the move, is undervalued to a degree in our climbing culture. And perhaps, like many things, that's because it's very difficult to measure. It's very easy by comparison to measure the number of climbs you did, but very hard to measure how much you were concentrating. Clearly in bouldering, we need to learn a number of basic techniques: how to get weight on our feet on steep ground, how to do heel hooks, how to do toe hooks, how to do knee bars, how to be dynamic, how to take holds very carefully, how to have different grip types. There are a number of different things, far too much to fit into one video, but I will do a series of basic techniques videos in future episodes, and if you'd like to see them, please do subscribe and hit the wee notifications bell so that you see them. Part 3 relates to gaining strength, maybe one of the most popular aspects of training for bouldering. To be good at bouldering, you need to have a strong body, you need to have strong shoulders, arms, and especially fingers. As a very broad general rule, I would say that people need a moderate to high level of body and upper body strength, and I would say that your fingers can never be strong enough in climbing. Also, strength itself has different components. We have the maximum muscle tension, that is the maximum amount of force that you can apply with a muscle, but you also have the rate of force development, and that's relevant in climbing. If you can imagine grabbing a hold, when you jump for a hold, the quicker you can apply that force, the more likely you are to stay on it. Training both these aspects of strength requires a lot of effort and focus, and in my mind, the ability to try hard is actually a trainable skill in itself, and is one of the hardest things to master. And to me, the act of strength training is a continual search for the ability to push the muscle that little bit further and extract that even more force in order to send the muscle a message that it's not strong enough. That really takes a huge amount of effort. Now, there's a bit of a paradox here. Expert athletes in any sport have so much control from their level of experience that they are able to produce a huge effort, and yet from the outside it might not seem obvious. Their face may look quite relaxed, their movement might look very fluid and effortless, and yet they are really, really trying hard. And I think it's only when you spend a lot of time watching athletes train hard that you get a real window into just how hard they're trying. So when you walk into a bouldering wall, you'll see the climbing wall itself, but you will also see a number of different pieces of apparatus for training basic strength. And the most important of these would be the fingerboard, but we also have the campus board, the rings, pull-up bars and free weights, and maybe some other things as well. All of these pieces of equipment are useful tools, but fundamentally, because climbing is still that very technical sport, actual bouldering on the boulder wall still forms the backbone of most boulderers training. If you ask very experienced boulderers, they will tell you that if they spend a lot of time away from climbing, just doing pure finger strength like fingerboarding or campus boarding or weights, they may well get significantly stronger on those exercises. But when they come back to the bouldering wall, for a while at least, they might actually perform more poorly. They might actually feel weaker on the wall because they've not had a chance to integrate that newfound strength into their overall climbing technique. That is, they cannot apply that strength fully on the boulder wall. And so a constant background amount of bouldering in your general routine is always critical, really. Basic strength exercises can be addictive, but try not to let these dominate your training too much. I would say that broadly, I probably spend around 4 times as much time climbing on the boulder wall, just doing bouldering, as I do doing all the other basic strength exercises put together. Part 4 relates to endurance. Now, bouldering is obviously an explosive, short duration activity, but I still think it is important to have at least some level of endurance, especially upper body forearm endurance. For one thing, not all boulder problems are short, and also not all boulder problems, even if they are short, are very quick to climb. Some of them, especially if you're on-sighting, you might have a bigger hold where you can rest, recover, and also regain your composure, which is critical, especially in a competition situation. So I think endurance is important to be able to sustain your level of power output for the whole duration of the boulder problem. It's also important to manage to have session endurance, that is the ability to complete a long training session doing lots and lots of boulder problems. But I also think it's important technically, because having good endurance improves your ability to climb in a fatigued state. It really helps to be able to keep your composure and modulate your power output from hold to hold, so that you don't only have one mode. I see a lot of boulderers who only have explosive mode. They can only pull with 100% and totally go for it, and they're not that good at relaxing on easier moves. Climbing requires you to be both explosive and also to rest and recover and switch very quickly from one to the other, which in my mind is one of the things that makes it a demanding and interesting sport. So those are some of the basic components of what we need to get good at bouldering. So part 5 comes on to the practicalities of how we would actually use a boulder wall to train. I actually think that one of the first questions to ask when starting to plan your training sessions on a bouldering wall is what your personality is. As we've already said, one of the key components of training for strength and technique is the ability to concentrate and focus and try hard. And some personalities will do well if there's a lot of other climbers around and they can feed off the energy of their friends and also learn directly the technique from them. And other climbers will work much better when a climbing wall is very quiet, and they find that if it's quiet, then they can concentrate and focus a lot better. I actually fall into that latter camp myself. I enjoy training completely alone, and I find that my work rate is much higher and my level of focus is much higher. And if I climb too much with other people in training, then I find that I don't always stick to my session goals all that well, and sometimes I just get a little bit distracted. However, I don't do that exclusively. It's not black or white. I maybe spend around 80% of my training completely alone in my garage, but the other 20% I actually do really enjoy climbing with other climbers. So it's not just black and white, but it's I focus the bulk of my training on what suits my personality and try to have the best of both worlds. Now, what time of day you actually go to a commercial climbing wall or boulders to train and how busy that climbing wall is might be entirely dictated by your work schedule and that might be a great reason to change your work schedule. If you can't do that or don't want to do that, then you may not have much of a choice in that issue. But even then, you may be able to, just by noticing whether having lots of other people around or not many people around is improving or taking away from your training, then you might be able to mitigate it in some ways. If the wall is quiet and you want to make the most of company, then you might get better at talking to other climbers and joining in with them. And if the opposite is true, you like to focus and be alone, then you might find that you gravitate towards quieter areas of the climbing wall, or maybe that you just organise your time in being social and talking and catching up with other climbers for set periods. But then once you go into climbing mode, then making sure that you make an effort to focus yourself and get ready for the effort required to actually apply your training stress. Broadly, boulder walls have all different shapes and sizes and angles of boulders to climb on, and I think it is a good idea to climb on all of those different angles and to try and not let any one become too much of a weak area. With a couple of caveats, there are some areas of setting in bouldering that are a little bit weird, if you will, and perhaps sometimes they're a little bit geared towards competition climbing, which is absolutely fine if that's your goal. But if it's not, then you may want to think, how well does that match your goal, and maybe you don't need to spend so much time doing those things. For instance, like the modern style that competition bouldering is moving in, with quite parkour-like running and jumping across volumes and, you know, big slopey volumes and kind of weird sideways dynos and things. That you certainly need to be extremely good at that to do well in boulder comps these days. But if you're training for a crimpy, overhanging boulder problem in Switzerland or in Scotland or somewhere like that, then that might not be top priority. I'm not saying never do it, but it's not top priority. One of the key angles that a lot of boulderers spend a lot of time on is 45 degrees. If you've seen some videos already of my own garage, that's dominated by a large 45 degree board, and partly that's dictated by my own personal weaknesses. I have had a long apprenticeship of over 25 years in rock climbing of all different types, and I've really clocked up a lot of moves in that time. So my general ability to move on rock is reasonably well developed. However, I have always lacked that raw strength on 45 degrees, and so that's why it's so important for me to spend an accentuated amount of time on this angle. But although that's related to my individual case, I still think that 45 degrees is a really good angle to spend a fair bit of time on, because it's steep enough that the holds are still fingery, but they're not tiny, so they're not wearing your skin out, and they're also not just really tweaky and nasty. But it also requires you to climb with your whole body. You need to have good body tension, and you need to have good understanding of body tension. Now, body tension is often thought of as an ability of strength, that is the strength in your core to apply force through your feet when you're on steep ground and to rotate your body around your shoulders like in a front lever. But strength is only one component of body tension. Body tension is also a technical ability. It's the ability to think about your upper body, and as you reach for the next handhold, to think about the handhold, but also to think about what's happening at the other end of your body at the same time. And that is actually quite a nuanced technical skill. Many of the larger commercial bouldering walls have a 45 board, and often these days, like mine, it has a lot of wood holds on it. And wood holds are really, really nice to train on. They don't have a great friction, so they force you to use a lot of strength. They also improve your pin strength very well. So I do think that 45 boards are a great all-round tool for learning both technique and also gaining strength in the whole body, but also the fingers all at the same time. Most climbing walls also have a fingerboard, and a fingerboard I think is a very important basic tool for any boulderer to gain their finger strength. And not just to gain finger strength overall, but also to balance finger strength between the different grip types. That is 3-finger drag, 4-finger open hand, and crimped, half crimped or full crimped with a thumb on, whichever. Now, I have already done a whole video on how to fingerboard, how to hangboard. If you search for how to hangboard, you'll see it. I'll also link to it in the corner of this video somewhere. So that video goes into the fundamentals of how to use that tool. The main thing I want to say in this video is, do you really need to do your fingerboarding at the climbing wall? You know, the climbing wall is a great resource to actually learn how to climb, and a fingerboard is a tool that you can have anywhere. I have a mobile fingerboard that I take with me if I'm traveling. I also, well, I have my own climbing wall at home, but I think for any any boulderer who's serious about improving, could really consider getting a fingerboard at home. If you live in rented accommodation, there are numerous ways to work around that by clamping some sort of system around door frames without having to do any modification to them so that you can hang a fingerboard. I've seen many climbers do this in many different ways, or having some sort of portable freestanding setup. You can make it happen if you're motivated to do it. So the key point is get a fingerboard and use it regularly. If you must use it at the climbing wall, then go for it. Does it really matter whether you do it before you're bouldering or after? I don't actually know the answer to that. In years gone by, I would have said that it's very important to do it before you're bouldering because that's when you have your maximum strength and you're also fresh. But my opinion has softened on this in recent years, to be perfectly honest. Both from having seeing some of the research on strength training that shows that even after our muscles are fatigued, if you strength train them, you still have many of the same biochemical adaptations. And the form and safety aspect may be negated, at least mostly, by the fact that the fingerboard is an extremely simple and very safe and very controlled exercise, so long as you follow some basic rules. And again, see my how to hangboard video for what those are. Because I have my own climbing wall at home, and so I have everything in one place, I tend to do many of my sessions where I'll come in, warm up on some big holds, I'll do a long session of bouldering, and I will try a mix of climbs that I can do in one try, some that take me 10 tries, and then some that are projects that stay up across multiple sessions, sometimes even multiple years. I do not follow any strict formula for how I split my time between these different activities. To be perfectly honest, I make some decisions on the actual day of the training session, depending on how I feel as I warm up, or actually how I feel when I get up in the morning. If I feel very fresh and strong, then I might try some of the hardest projects, and I might also do more in the session generally and focus just generally on the harder stuff. If I'm feeling really fatigued, then I might focus on the easier, more mileage type boulder problems, more of a technique focus, and I also might do more of my endurance training on those sessions. I do keep a rough training plan that is detailed out for a few months, but I don't follow it prescriptively from day to day, like I must do this on this day or rest on this day. And partly that's because my goal is to climb outdoors. Actually, if the weather is nice, I don't train at all, I just go climbing. And I only really train if the weather is poor. So I am not saying that scheduling and planning your training in detail is not important. It can be useful for multiple reasons. One of which being that it just can direct your efforts. It can make sure that the training gets done. Some people really respond well to following a plan and have that sense of achievement of completing it. Others, like myself, I don't respond so much to that, and I prefer a freer schedule where I know roughly how many training sessions of different types, like how many fingerboard sessions, how many campus board sessions, how many ring sessions, how many boulder sessions I want to have done within a month or a season. But how I actually get there, I don't think is really critical. So I'm more likely to get the most benefit out of those training sessions if I focus more on how I feel as I'm warming up and make the decisions from there. Another key question in planning your training is when to actually stop the session. And again, I do this very much by feel. I do try to train as much as I can. It may be that if you're very time limited, then it's not something you need to answer at all. You're just training for as much time as you have, and you go right to the end of that. If you have more unlimited time, then there may be a point where there is no actual return on the training, especially with strength, where quality is really important. But if you're able to mix in some endurance training in with that, and also have a broad range of activities in the session, so you may do an hour, let's say you have an hour of hard boulders that you're trying over multiple attempts, and maybe you're only succeeding a handful of times. And then you have some easier boulders for another hour, and then you have some fingerboard, rings, floor exercises for strength, and then some endurance circuits. That could easily be a 4-hour session and really quite fatiguing. and that sounds plenty to me. If you're early in your climbing progression, I wouldn't worry too much about making sure these decisions are right from the get-go. I would just go climbing, include some of these activities in your general sessions. It doesn't need to be really structured, and then over time you will start to learn what your weaknesses are and how much your body can handle, and then you'll be able to flesh out those decisions from there as you get to know your body better. And then what about beyond the training session itself? What happens after in the intervening period that is called recovery? So we just talked about when to end the session. So when you're too fatigued to continue training, that might be primarily dependent on what happens during the recovery period. Now, recovery has a time component, the amount of hours that your body has to recover between sessions, but also a qualitative component, and both have to be optimized. And if you've ever wondered how professional athletes who train every day, sometimes twice a day, manage to actually handle that much training volume, it's because the quality of the recovery is very high. Those athletes make sure they go to bed at a good time. They make sure they have a quiet, cool bedroom to sleep in. They make sure their nutrition is excellent and they're not sabotaging their training with things like alcohol. Now again, recovery is a huge area, and I will maybe do some videos that are focused on just that in the future. But broadly, as a general rule of thumb, think about times when you wake up in the morning and you feel very rested and you feel very good and energized and ready to train, and think about what you've been doing in the hours and days before that and try to do more of that. And then think about times where you feel fatigued and not ready to train and the quality of your training is poor, and think about what recovery activities led up to those poor sessions and try to avoid those things. In the last part, I'm going to talk about tactics, a few other tactics that can make your whole training routine easier. Now, one factor in bouldering that's obviously important is how you manage your skin. Boulderers are obsessed with skin recovery and skin quality, and there's a lot of discussion about different methods of maintaining your skin, and people try to use different products and things like that and practices to improve the quality of your skin. What qualities are we actually looking for in skin? Well, I think we want it to be thick and tough and not with any breaks. One of the key things to avoid is split tips from sharp edges. Maybe less common indoors, but certainly a major problem outdoors if you don't take good care of your skin, or if you're climbing in bad conditions, or both. If you have a split tip, then you're looking at 2 days minimum rest, assuming good recovery quality. The other thing that can split is the creases in the joints where your fingers flex. And if your skin is very dry, or you use products that artificially dry your skin more than normal, then that can be a real problem as well. However, if your skin is too soft and moist, either because the conditions are warm and humid, or your skin is too thin, or you're doing things like washing your hands in water very frequently, or using other sorts of creams that soften your skin, then this can also be a problem and can lead to your skin wearing out faster during sessions. I personally use 3 separate interventions to take good care of my skin, and that covers 99% of my skincare routine. Part 1 is good sleep, part 2 is good diet, and part 3 is rest days. And if you get those right, I think you really don't need to do anything else with your skin in most cases, excluding some things like skin conditions. I actually have a bit of eczema as well, so I can suffer from dry skin, but I also have very sweaty hands, and so I can wear my skin out quite fast in climbing in warm conditions or on rough resin holds. So when I'm bouldering or doing circuits, I do like to spend a bit of time climbing on the wooden holds because I wear my skin out less quickly, but I also take care to try and climb in good conditions. I'm lucky enough to have my own climbing wall where I have more control over the conditions, but if you're finding that your climbing wall is too hot, you can ask the staff to install some fans, open a door. Also, you can do things like just go outside for 5 minutes every so often to help lower your body temperature and get your skin temperature under control and get it nice and dried out. Some people use some more intense interventions to thicken and to dry their skin. Things like using methenamine in a brand named cream called Antihydral, or some people are even using a technique called iontophoresis, which is used to treat hyperhidrosis, excessive sweating of usually the hands, but also other parts of the body, where you place your hands in a tray of water with a weak current put across it. And I will do some videos exploring those in more detail in future as well. But just to keep in mind that those are options that are there for people who really struggle with skincare. I use a little bit of antihydral very occasionally and only in the summer myself. But other than that, as I say, my primary skin recovery protocol is sleep, diet and rest days. The final tactic that I feel is really important for maximising the benefit of your training, which is sometimes lost in discussions of training, is to enjoy your training. Whatever way you approach your mindset with training, and the psychology of training is very, very complex and individualised. I think it is useful to try and find a way to enjoy something that maybe even at first you don't really enjoy. I just take great pleasure in solving boulder problems, in trying over and over and trying to improve the nuance of my movement on a boulder problem, and when it works, then that gives me an enormous amount of pleasure, and that's what drives me forward from day to day, week to week, year to year in my own training. And it may be that what motivates you in your training is exactly the same, or it may be something quite different, and it may be that there are multiple ingredients to your enjoyment from training. But I think the main thing is enjoy your training, and then I think it's far more likely that you will boulder better. So this has been an overview of the fundamentals of how you would use a bouldering wall and how you would train for bouldering. In future episodes of this vlog, I will go into great detail in those subcomponents, each of them in many different series. And if you have questions of what you would like me to feature or you think was missing from this video, please do comment below. And please do remember to subscribe to my channel so that you see those future videos, and I'll see you in the next one.